Hello and welcome to the Three Will Podcast. This is your host, Danny Ryan, and I am sitting here, Mr. Eric Bowden. How are you doing, Mr. Eric Bowden?
Awesome. I'm doing fantastic today and just delighted to be in your studio today, Danny.
I'm delighted you're delighted. So today's subject came from a Yammer post that we're not using Yammer anymore. We're just using Teams, right?
That's right.
Did you get the memo?
That's right. Yammer is the old new.
So I posted up a picture that I thought was so funny. So this is I had an image, and from that image I said, well, why don't we do a podcast out of it? So I asked to see if anybody knew anything about supporting multiple languages. So we're going to talk about multiple languages in SharePoint. Yep. And you were the person that everybody threw out and said, talk to Eric.
That's right.
He knows a little bit about this. It sounds like you've used it in the past and now you're using it now.
That's right. Yeah, my first experience with translation services or supporting multiple languages in SharePoint is about maybe almost 10 years back.
Wow.
And now I'm recently working on it with SharePoint 2016. So my first experience was with SharePoint 2007, which so way back, and now SharePoint 2016. And I've been really pleased with how easy it was to set up and the reliability of it so far.
Nice. And so, has it changed a lot, or is it the similar type of setup than what you did before in the past?
Yeah. So from my recollection, it really hasn't changed much. It's much the same. For folks who have worked with it in the past, SharePoint uses a feature called variations. It did in 2007, and it still does today. So much of that is the same. It seems like I haven't gone and done a comparison, but it just seems like the configuration, the setup, and the really the reliability of it is much better than I remembered. So
I use the same thing for my dance moves. I use variations on my dance moves.
That's right.
That's kind of interesting. Probably some similar type of thing, right?
That's right. Very, very similar. Very similar. Yeah, you have to do a little more reading to use variations, but.
And the one you worked on so long ago, that was a public-facing site?
That was a public-facing website.
Back when we did public-facing websites in SharePoint?
That's right.
Back in the day, and now that site's gone?
That's right, yeah. And this most recent one, this is a knowledge base.
Okay.
So, authors are authoring content in knowledge base articles in English, and they'll be translated into Spanish. So we have just one target language in this for this application, but of course they may very well be adding more, and SharePoint supports obviously more.
Well, talk me through the setup. What do you do to prepare for this? So talk me through that.
Yeah. So your first step, I think, is to decide if you'll ever want to support multiple languages. And if you do, then I recommend that you start by configuring your site for variations and choose whatever your primary language may be, English in our case. And so what you do is you go into SharePoint, you create a site collection.
Okay.
Go into the site collection features, and you'll configure for what is your source variation. And your source, like as I said, in my case is English. And what will happen is SharePoint provisions a subsite for you for that primary variation, your source variation. And so from that point, if you think you want to support multiple languages but you're not ready to yet, you stop there. You're in a good place. You have a good platform for supporting multiple languages, but you don't need to take any further action from that point.
So is that like it creates a little like an English directory or something along those lines?
Exactly. So it's with the, and the subsite is named by the language that it supports.
Nice.
So next step is when you're ready to support additional languages, you're going to need to install the language pack for SharePoint into that environment. And then you're going to need to, you go in and you configure your variations, and you configure an additional variation for the new language, and that will be the target for your translated content. And just like it did for English, SharePoint will create a subsite for that new language.
So is there a language pack per language, or does the language pack? Okay.
Yep. One language pack per language.
Okay.
So you'll go to go download those from Microsoft and install them. Mm-hmm.
And then once you have that installed, what's the next step after that?
So next step is test it out, begin using it, and the flow is that on your source site, you of course you author your content and you publish it.
Uh-huh.
And once that content is published, it'll be automatically migrated to your variation targets.
Okay.
In the example project I'm working on right now, that's Spanish. So it gets migrated to my Spanish site, and then the next step is when it gets migrated, it's migrated in English. So it's unpublished. So it's copied over to that Spanish site. It's not published, and what it's doing is it's waiting for someone to come along and either manually translate that from English into Spanish and publish it.
Okay.
Or SharePoint has translation services built in.
Shut the front door.
It does. It's awesome. It's cloud hosted. The translation services are cloud hosted. It's provided as part of your SharePoint license.
Okay.
So there's not an additional cost for using translation services.
Really?
Really. And in my case, there was no configuration involved. So I didn't go into SharePoint Central Administration and configure translation services. I believe it configured it as part of the running the configuration wizard in Central Administration. So it's already there. You're over in your Spanish site. You're looking at what is an English content article because it just got copied from the English source. Mm-hmm. You click a button to invoke the translation services, and while you're watching, mm-hmm. it will translate it, and you're then presented with that article in Spanish. The last step is assuming you're bilingual, so you're going to approve, and I certainly recommend that because translations, there's plenty of opportunity mm-hmm. for flaws.
Hence the image that brought all this, which was
that's right.
You'll see it this will be at the top of the blog post, but it's basically an image of it looks like a Chinese shop, and it says cannot connect to translation service, and they went ahead and printed that out on the sign on the front of the store. So yep. What happens when this happens in this case?
Yeah, it's easy for those things to slip by.
Yeah.
An error message can be presented in Spanish, as in that case. It can make an incorrect translation, use a wrong word choice. So you're expecting someone it needs to be bilingual to proofread that yep. document. Now, what the translation services does is reduces the number of resources that you need, to support this. The project I'm working on is going to be a huge volume of content, really going to be, let's say, authored by in the neighborhood of 20 people. So, without these translation services, you may find yourself needing 20 bilingual authors to manage translating that content. With translation services, maybe you can get by with one or two.
Because they're just proofreading.
They're just proofreading.
Yeah.
Proofread, publish.
Yeah.
And you're done.
Yeah. Very cool. Now you were telling me on the current project that there's like a set of words that you can use, it's almost like a scaled down version of English that translates well into other languages. Yep. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so a big part of the project that I'm working on right now is content refactoring. So we're taking content which is in an older knowledge base and migrating that into SharePoint, but before it gets put into SharePoint, there's a step of content refactoring, which is really improving the quality of the content of those knowledge base articles, improving the readability of it. In many cases, what was a large, complex article is being divided up into numerous smaller, simpler, easier to read articles. And then, to your point, an aspect of that is using a simplified English, using terms which we know automated translation services will be successful with. in translating from English to Spanish.
Nice.
Yeah, and we're working with a partner, Doug Davis from ProEdit.
Shout out to Doug.
Shout out to Doug. He's performing the content refactoring and the those steps of really recognizing what's gonna be required for an article to be translated from English to Spanish. So a huge benefit for having Doug on the team and his team. Recognizing what is really a pretty big deal when when you're working with translating content.
And then what do you do? Do you have I know with the site we worked on a while back, there was a language selector, or do you use stuff from the browser, or how do you choose which language the end user is going to see?
Yeah, great question, because there are a number of approaches for this. And for our knowledge base project, it's using a feature in SharePoint called the product catalog, and what or otherwise known as cross-site publishing. And what the product catalog or cross-site publishing allows you to do is to abstract the content and the authoring of content from the search and consumption of that content. So what you end up having is you have a knowledge base of content, which is where content authors go to manage this content, and then you have a search center or experience for users to search and consume that content. And what we're doing is have a separate site for each language. So there's an English-based experience for English users, a Spanish site for Spanish users. Now that might sound like a great deal of effort, a separate site for each language. If I'm going to support a dozen languages, that's going to get pretty deep.
I'll do the math on that. There's a dozen sites.
There, yeah. You are a smart man. But the good news is that there's very little translatable content within these sites. Most all of the content comes from the articles, and we're using managed metadata.
Okay.
And managed metadata also participates in translation services. So you have a whole catalog of terms that you're using to decorate your content, and you can submit those to translation services, and they'll be submitted from English to, or translated from English to Spanish. Yeah, it's really slick.
Very nice. So what else? What else is there for getting it set up or anything?
That's pretty much it.
Is that it?
That's pretty much it. Okay. There are additional variations of the variation, to explore. There's another strategy, which I think is what you might have been thinking about initially, is having your users, go directly to the site where the content lives, and that is a strategy employed also. And what happens there is that you navigate. I mentioned there's a hierarchy of sites, sub-site for each language, and SharePoint makes the decision when you navigate to that root site. There's a redirector on the root site that makes the decision for which language is appropriate for you, and it'll direct you to the subsite for your language.
That's typically something the browser, probably different across browsers, but that's a piece of information you can get from their browser typically, right?
Right, that's right.
Yeah. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Look forward. We'll have to do a follow-up after you're done with the project and see how everything went, and maybe see what sort of lessons you learned by getting this set up. But
absolutely,
this is good stuff. I know some of the larger sites that we're working on, multiple languages has to be there, so this is some great experience you're getting. So cool.
It is, yeah, and it's a great value, from SharePoint. And the language translation services, this particular customer, they really weren't expecting it.
Yeah.
But when they saw it, it's a really big value add for them, and a good reason, for them to be using SharePoint.
Especially, it's nice as part of the licensing.
Yes.
That is very sweet. That's awesome. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to listen to this. If you have any questions for Eric, leave them in the comment section, and he'll follow up with you there. And this is great. Another great follow-up to knowledge bases. So looking for other topics. Tommy and I did covered knowledge bases with SharePoint a couple weeks ago. So anything else you're picking up on this project, let's get together and talk. This is a great subject. So thank you for doing this, Eric.
Will do.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for listening, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.